Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Health. It is time for Chapter 4 Gender, Sexuality, Intimate Relationships, and Communication. So let's start by me mentioning that right off the bat, gender and sexuality are two very, very different things, and they come from different parts of your brain, different parts of your body, and one of them is heavily identified and shaped by society, and the other one is purely biological. So we're going to spend a little bit of time making those two different things very clear. So they are not the same. They're both incredibly complicated, and gender especially is something that can be shaped by how you were raised, and by what society you're in, and even by the mood you're in during the day, how you express your gender. So let's talk a little bit about that. So gender is this is usually when I talk about this in a class in person, we go around and we talk about how do you identify a boy versus a girl. And almost everyone says boy babies are given blue things, girl babies are given pink things, girls play with dolls, boys play with trucks. Boys are rough and tumble, and girls are sweet and caring, and those are all stereotypes, and those are all put onto kids when they're kids, okay? So these are things that, let me tell you, little boys, little girls do not know that, at least when they're babies, cannot see color at all, so there's no reason to give a boy blue things and a girl pink things, except that it tells the rest of the world what your baby is. And so if you are concerned with the rest of the world knowing that your baby has either a penis or a vagina, then by all means tell them, put them in a blue shirt or a pink shirt. But to the kid, you have to realize what you're doing when you do that, and you reinforce that all the time. You're telling them what you expect them to present as boy or girl. And we're going to see that it's actually very, very complicated. There's way more than 7.5 billion people on the planet now, so this idea that we can group everyone into either being a boy or a girl is it's just ridiculous now. We now know that it's actually much, much more complicated than this. And a lot of culture is, a lot of gender is culturally influenced. So if you talk about how, and a lot of this can be very detrimental, actually. So a lot of times people say, well, girls aren't good at math. Well, actually, up until middle school, boys and girls perform exactly the same on math tests with very little variance. It's not until they start to get to puberty and they start to really hear people say, well, it's okay, girls aren't good at math, that they start to get behind the boys. Okay, so they're either not given as much help in class, they're repeatedly told they don't have to work as hard because it's okay, girls aren't as good at math. And then they realize, well, maybe I'm not good at math, and they kind of let it go, that you start to see this really big gap, okay? On the other hand, there are some amazing female mathematicians out there. There are some people that don't identify as any gender that are amazing at science and math. So this idea that only boys are good at math is something it's a strong cultural influence. We could go on. I could rant about this for days and days, you guys, but we're not going to do that. Let's keep going on and look at the three aspects to gender. Okay, so the one people most commonly identify is biological sex, and this is this idea that so as animals, we are constantly trying to identify for stress reasons. So is something in danger or not? Is it a danger? Can I eat it? Can I reproduce with it? Those are the three big questions that every animal is always asking deep, deep in the subconscious. Either you could be a dog, it could be a person, you could be any organism, and any animal anyway, and you're always asking yourself, is this dangerous? Can I eat it, or is it should I worry about having sex with it, that kind of thing. So we as humans, we are far beyond those being the only questions we have to worry about. We no longer care, is every personal interaction going to end in my death, depending on what your lifestyle is anyway. And so we're beyond these questions, but we still really want to categorize things. So a lot of people get really upset when someone doesn't want to be categorized as male or female, and they just can't handle it. Okay, so we're going to talk about biological sex and especially chromosomal sex, because we like to think about boys are XY, girls are XX. Well, it turns out it's a little more complicated than that. We're going to talk about gender identity and gender expression, two things that are very, very different. So let's start with biological sex. So this very simply is the physical sex characteristics that you're born with and develop. Do you have a penis? Do you have a vulva? Okay, so people often will Oh, sorry. Okay, let's keep going. So people use this to make snap judgments about someone, and the reason why you make snap judgments about someone is because you're then going to that influences how you're going to treat them. Now, if you're going to treat someone differently, whether they are man or woman, that says a lot more about you than it does the person that you're trying to judge. Okay, so this is definitely something to keep in mind. So there's primary and secondary sex characteristics. So the primary is, are you born with a penis or a vagina? And so here, first of all, we're going to get into this a little bit, but the penis is the external male genitalia. The vagina is actually all the internal female. It's what lovingly called the baby hallway. So that is the internal tube within the female. When you are looking at the external female genitalia, you're actually talking about the vulva. But for some reason, we call it the vagina. It's not. It's the vulva. It's fine. However, if you are just categorizing someone based on if they have a penis or a vagina, you're leaving out people who are intersex. So the penis and vagina and the vulva are very, very closely related in that before either one is, when you're prenatal, so when you're still in the womb, there is this interstage where you haven't been given the signal to either become male or to become female, and you're in this intersex stage where either one could happen. Now, you have to be given the right signal from the SRY gene if you're male, which is the sex-determining region of the Y chromosome, which will then say, okay, here, we need to push the structure externally, we need to create the testicles, which are also external, and we need to start all this tubing inside so that everything's connected properly. And that's going to make you a biological male based on a primary sex characteristic. On the other hand, you have to be given the right signal from that double dosage of X chromosomes to become female, or biologically female, which then says, okay, get rid of all the external stuff. Don't let it connect in the middle, so the labia that you see in external female genitalia in a male are actually going to come together to form the shaft of the penis, and the clitoris becomes the clitoral head becomes the penile head. But in the case of the female, they say, okay, move that up, don't make these things connect, so let's have an opening, that'll be the vaginal opening, and let's get everything inside. So instead of having testicles that descend, we have ovaries that go into the body, and then we get the uterus and everything else forming, which would otherwise be, that tissue would go away in a male, or become part of the prostate and other things like that. So what happens if you get halfway signal, you get something that's not quite fully the male signal, not quite fully the female signal, or if they are both happening at the same time, then you get something called intersex, and that's where you have so either you have a clitoris that looks very much like a penis, or you have the labial lips look like they should be forming the penile shaft, but they don't close all the way. So on a baby, you can't really tell, is this a male or a female, and you have to make a decision, are they going to grow up male or female? That's going to, again, once the doctor makes a call, that if it's a boy or a girl, that changes how society reacts to your baby. And so that becomes a very intense moment of decision, and what if you decide wrong, and it's so complicated. There are also cases of accidents. There was a very famous case in Russia where there was a circumcision that happened in these twins, and they're twin boys, identical twin boys, and during the circumcision, they actually cut far too much of the penis off, and the mom said, well, you know what, I've always wanted a boy and a girl, can you fix it so I have a little boy and a little girl. Perfect. And the doctors were like, oh, the doctors did not tell the woman, but they're like, this is a perfect chance to see what happens if you raise someone as a girl, even though they're biologically a boy. So they changed they did some plastic surgery, and they changed the external genitalia so that the one who was accidentally chopped a little more than they should have been, then instead had a vulva, and they left the other one intact as a male. And then they just said, yeah, you're just going to have to, the brain is still male, so you're going to have to give the one you're raising as a girl hormones, so that when they hit puberty, they go through female puberty instead of male puberty. Well, as you can expect, the child grew up incredibly confused, incredibly upset, and did not understand why, that their body didn't look like what they expected it to look like, and they were just incredibly confused. And it finally came out when this kid was like 16 that here's what happened, we raised you as a girl, but you actually were born a boy, and then there was an accident, and the child was raised as a girl, said, well, then that's exactly right, that's what's wrong with me, I need to be fixed, you need to make me a boy. And so they went through trans surgery in order to make this child more like what they felt they were. Okay, so imagine you have such a strong influence in your brain telling you that your body is incorrect. So it's not just, oh, I wish I could lose some pounds, but I can't even look at myself because it is just wrong. So that's, when we talk about trans, that's what we're going to be getting to. So accidents can happen in the delivery room or in circumcisions, and then you have to decide, am I going to raise this child as a boy or a girl? And we now know much better that you can't just switch the genders and the external genitalia and then switch your biological sex, okay? All right. Secondary sex characteristics. So you don't walk around looking at someone's penis or vagina. You instead look at these secondary sex characteristics. So how is the body shaped? What is the voice pitch? What kind of body hair do you see? And secondary sex characteristics also have to do with what hormones are released and when. Is it a cyclical release that varies in intensity? That would usually identify you as female, or is it a constant release that is literally constant all day, all night, no problem? That usually identifies you as a male. And also what hormones are present. That's going to determine, or at least, okay, so estrogen and testosterone are both present in males and females, but in females you have a much, much higher dose of estrogen, and in males you have a much, much higher dose of testosterone. So that's another way to identify the biological sex of somebody. So, what about chromosomes? What about that X and that Y? So this is a stained, and you can see even when we're talking about, we fall into this same stereotype of pink things are girls and blue things are boys. Whatever, we're just going to keep going with it. Okay, so what about chromosomal sex? So if you are born with 2 doses of X chromosome, you are considered a female. If you are born with an X chromosome and a Y chromosome, you are a male. You can tell that the Y chromosome is much, much smaller than the X chromosome. There's a lot on the Y, there's a lot missing from what probably used to be an X chromosome that got chopped and chopped and chopped into a Y chromosome. Really the only things left on the Y chromosome that we know of, that could be more, is that sex-determining region of the Y chromosome. So if you think about it, if you're making any kind of cell in your body, it's based on what you are. So anytime you make a cell, if you're a female, all of your cells are going to have X's because you only have X chromosomes. Males can be either X or Y, so the sperm are going to make X's and Y's because all of your other cells have X and Y in them. However, you'll see in a lot of old textbooks and old professors will say that female is default. That is not true, and we're going to see why. Because it turns out there are other combinations of chromosomes that happen that change biological and chromosomal sex. Okay, so remember I said it was that double dosage of X chromosome that then creates what we call a normal female genitalia. Well, we're going to see if you have an extra dose of X or if you're missing an X, we get some abnormalities. So there's 2 double doses of X. If you have an extra Y chromosome, you also get some differences. Okay, so let's talk about Turner syndrome. So Turner syndrome is where for some reason, the egg that gets fertilized by the sperm, for some reason, only 1 X chromosome is present and no Y chromosomes are present. So this could be an egg with no Y chromosome, but it's usually a sperm with no Y chromosome. These people who have Turner syndrome look normal at birth, except they tend to have kind of puffy hands because for some reason this lack of that extra X chromosome causes lymph flow, so your immune fluid flow to be restrained. These kids so this is where we see this idea that you can't just have 1 X chromosome and no Y chromosome to be a quote-unquote normal female, because if you don't have an X chromosome, you don't have any menstruation, you don't have any ovaries, you have what's called a gonadal streak, so it's just kind of a hint of where the ovaries should be, but then they don't develop. You see this flap of skin, this fold of skin that goes from basically under the ear directly to the shoulder that is very characteristic of someone with Turner syndrome. So none of these things that I just mentioned, like or a low hairline, which you can see here, you have kind of this very receded hairline, and you see this very characteristic facial structure. None of these things are dangerous. It's when you look into things such as the constriction of the aorta, so there's something about that double X chromosome which helps your heart form completely, okay? Or in the case of males, there's something about having X chromosome and a Y chromosome that allows the heart to form completely. And we know now it's probably because in the case of an XY individual, the X chromosome is allowed to make its genes do their thing without any kind of restriction. In someone who has two X chromosomes, you see one X chromosome get turned off, except for a few genes, and then the other chromosome just goes crazy. Well, in the case of this, if this X chromosome is going, doing its thing to being normal, but then there's not that second X chromosome to also provide a double dosage of another gene, then you get abnormalities, okay? Let's see what else. So yeah, it's really this constriction of the aorta that can lead to a lot of problems with Turner syndrome. These people do not mature sexually. They they also tend to have impaired hearing. They can't hear certain frequencies of sound due to a malformed coil in their inner ear. But they have normal intelligence and a normal lifespan and they lead productive lives. They just are not reproductive. Okay, so what if you have an extra X chromosome? So this is metafemale or trisomy X syndrome, and these individuals tend to be very tall, whereas someone with Turner's has normal intelligence. Someone with an extra X chromosome has a lot of learning disabilities. They have incredibly limited fertility. They don't look very different. So there's no visible differences. This actually happens in 1 in 1,000 females, so more commonly than Turner syndrome. But yeah, so you see, and you can, so all the pictures you see, you might be able to tell really, if you do a lot of investigation, you might be able to see the small eye openings, the smooth upper part of the lip, etc. But you also see this in other genetic factors, so that's not always very, oh my goodness, what am I trying to say? It's not always the way to identify someone with trisomy X. But this, again, the fact that you have one extra X chromosome and suddenly you don't, you have very limited fertility and you have learning disabilities tells you there's something about that extra X chromosome. It doesn't make you more female. It actually starts to turn things off and becomes problematic. Now let's say you have an extra X chromosome but also a Y chromosome. So in this case, this is called Klinefelter's. It happens in about 1 in every 650 guys. But very often these embryos are self-aborting. They don't go to term. If they are born, they have elongated limbs. They have a lot of learning disabilities and low IQ. And again, this makes sense when we're talking if you have an extra X chromosome, even if there's a Y chromosome present, that extra X will impede brain development. You have a lot of infertility and due to small testicles. You see that you end up with a feminine body shape and low muscle mass. So even though that Y chromosome is present there's something about that extra X chromosome that impedes the secondary growth of masculine body mass. And again, also associated with more things we usually associate with females, you see an increased risk of osteoporosis and breast cancer in someone with an extra X chromosome, but also a Y chromosome, and an increased risk of extragonadal germ cell tumors. So what that means is you start getting cells that should be making sperm growing outside of the testis, and they are unchecked and they become tumors. So there's something strange about that extra X chromosome that's affecting those males. Okay, let's talk about if you have someone with XYY. So this is called supermale or Jacob syndrome. So this is a double dose of the Y chromosome. These kids present normally at birth. This is about 1 in every 1,000 births. You see, it's not until they start to go into language development and learning development and motor function that you start to see a problem. So these Jacob syndrome kids, they'll have a delay in language and learning development. They will not hit the markers they're supposed to hit, like at a certain age a baby should be walking, at a certain age they should be rolling over, etc., etc. They don't hit those markers. Sometimes these kids will be taller and hairier at puberty. They also have really heavy facial features. They have very blocky faces. They have intense acne. And there is a chance that this extra Y chromosome could present as an increase in violent tendencies. So if 1 in 1,000 kids have the supermale syndrome, they tend to be only 1 in 250 people in prisons. So they're overrepresented in prisons. So there was a very big campaign to say that anyone with an extra Y chromosome is so normal. Don't talk shit. We're totally fine. Everything's great. But this is kind of that key that says, okay, if you're so normal, why are so many more people who are in prison? Why is that population so much higher? Why are you represented more in prison? It could be because taller kids they very often become the bullies because they're the first to develop, or it could be something psychological that we don't know. So if you look over, interestingly, so they get even though people with Jacob syndrome are very, they present a lot of masculine features such as that heavy facial feature, they don't really grow a lot of facial hair. Now, let me just point out real quick, you may have one or two of these things, like you might be taller than average. That doesn't mean you have Jacob syndrome. You have to have all of these different things to have that. And if you're ever in doubt, just go have a blood test and they'll be able to tell you. Okay, let's keep going. All right, so other cases of intersex that we could go into forever, but let me just show some interesting things. So there's this case of someone who identified themselves as John versus Joan, and the idea here was this person was very strongly. This is more of a gender thing than a sexuality thing, I'm realizing right now, so I'm going to come back to this in a second. Ambiguous genitalia happen about 1 in every 1,500 births, and then you have to make the decision, am I going to raise my kid as a boy or a girl? And then once you make that decision, the doctor goes in and does surgery. Sometimes, unfortunately, doctors will make the call without even telling the parents, and so that is because, the doctors know best. That may or may not be true depending on where you are. And so, just keep that in mind. There are people who are hermaphroditic. That means they display both male and female traits. These people tend to also have, they tend not to be fertile because even though they have a vagina and a penis, what usually happens is the bottom part of the penile shaft doesn't close all the way, and then that leads into a tube, and so it looks like a small vagina. Anyway, so in that case, you tend also not to have functional reproductive organs. So there's that. As far as you don't make eggs or sperm. There's something called androgen versus estrogen insensitivity. So this can happen at so many levels here. Interestingly, when you are being formed in the womb, your brain is, if you're a female. Okay, let me do this way. If you're someone with 2 X chromosomes, your brain has something in it called an alpha-fetoprotein, and what it does is it soaks up any estrogen that gets into the brain and doesn't let it bind to anything. It doesn't let estrogen affect the brain. If you're a male, that alpha-fetoprotein that absorbs estrogen is not present. And the reason why is because it turns out estrogen is the hormone that masculinizes the brain before birth. And so the idea being if you're someone who is an XY individual and you get a wash of estrogen from your mom, that's going to masculinize the brain. Okay? So in female or XX individuals, the alpha-fetoprotein presence is going to cause estrogen not to masculinize the brain. Now, what if you are insensitive to, or let's say you're an XX individual and you don't have that alpha-fetoprotein, well, you're going to develop female genitalia, but a masculine brain, and vice versa. And so that's going to be really difficult. And when we talk about gender identity and gender expression, we'll get into that a little bit more. Another thing that could happen is at puberty, your receptors don't respond to androgens, which is like testosterone or estrogens. So then what happens? Then you just kind of keep on this pathway that your body's already going into, and you don't go into puberty. And so that can be very problematic, especially in society where we put so much emphasis on when are you going to get your growth spurt, when are you going to start to develop breasts, etc. So when are you going to start growing a beard, whatever, the moment every preteen boy dreams of, like, what am I going to get, when am I going to start growing hair in places, etc., etc. If you have androgen or estrogen insensitivity, you may not start to develop any of these characteristics. And in that case, you go to a doctor and they will evaluate you and then put you on steroidal treatment. They're actually, you guys, I could talk about this forever, but I don't want to put you through that. So let's just keep moving. Let's talk about gender. If I can get this to focus. There we go. Okay. Gender identity is how you identify in your own head and how you align with or rebel against what you understand your gender options to be. So biological sex is literally, what is my body doing? Is it making boy things, girl things? Is it confused about what to make, etc.? Gender identity is 1000% sociological. So how do you identify as a male or a female, and how does that then fit into what I know male or female to be? Okay, and so there's this video I'm going to link to in the module today that is really, really good, and it's this guy kind of giving the rundown of how we raise kids to be either boys or girls, and then how we hope that they stay in their roles in society, but also how we switch our gender identities or the intensity of our identities depending on their situations. So if you're the example he uses is when he wakes up in the morning, the speaker talks about how he goes through his whole metrosexual routine because he really likes to be pretty, as far as like he wants his skin to be perfect, he wants his hair to be perfect, he wants his eyebrows to be perfect, everything to be perfect. But then when he goes to work, or on his way to work, and he goes to this coffee shop that is run by a bunch of guy baristas, he wants to kind of be one of the guys, and so he gets kind of a gruff voice, and he starts to kind of joke with them about whatever. When he gets to work and he greets the receptionist who he's trying to flirt with, he kind of, depending on what he wants to do, he'll act slightly differently. He basically alters his level of masculinity depending on his situation. And we all do this all day long, every day. So how feminine do I want to appear in certain situations? So at school, in a learning situation, we like to hope that everyone is gender neutral and you're just being yourself in class and not worried about should I look more masculine or feminine. We know that's not true because anytime you get individuals together, they start to feed off each other's pheromones and respond in different ways that you may not even understand, which is intense and exciting, but not for today. Girls do this too. Females will also do this, where in certain situations you want to be as gender neutral as possible as to not attract attention, and in other situations you want to be heavily feminine so that you can play up that side, etc. Okay. So this is, again, very rooted in sociology. What looks very masculine to one culture might look incredibly feminine to other cultures. So, and we even use this to stereotype cultures. So I was listening to a podcast today where they were making fun of French culture. They were saying, even the most masculine French man is still very gay and male in our standards. And it's this weird idea that we can make fun of certain sexualities and certain cultures in the context of sexuality and gender expression, because then it's funny, and if it's a joke, it's okay. But the question is it actually okay, etc.? Okay, let's keep going. So the sociology idea has to do with gender norms, gender roles, gender cues. So a gender norm is girls like pink, boys like blue. Girls become teachers, boys become accountants. So gender norms, we're starting to realize more and more, can be incredibly detrimental. They can keep certain parts of gender norms or racial norms or anything like that, keep certain parts of society quote unquote in their place, which is not okay. And so we're starting to realize that gender normativeness is not okay, and we're starting to realize males and females should be treated equally, or people who do not identify as either. Gender roles, so do you participate in the quote-unquote correct gender role? So you're a girl, you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to let the boy ask you out. Ugh, really? So weird. That's, again, society decided that was okay. I had a friend who has been in a relationship for 11 years, and she's been joking about, like, when's he going to ask me to marry him? Or not joking, she's definitely starting to get antsy, like, when are we getting married? So I said, why don't you just ask him to marry you? And she's like, no, how dare you? He's supposed to do it. And that's, we have this idea that that's correct in certain societies, but why? Why is it the male has to do it, and the female has to get all gushy and excited, and etc.? That also ties into your gender cues. Okay, so there's weird stuff in society that determines how we express if we identify as male or female. These gender options have to do, how about not ought, but to do with how you were raised as a kid. So were you raised to socialize? So were you socialized so that you knew that girls had to do a certain thing, boys had to do a certain thing, and that people have certain roles they have to fill based on, this is how it gets weird, why should you have to fulfill these certain roles based on what's in your pants or on your chest? So as soon as you start to realize that is something, then you start to question a lot of things. I remember the first time when I was a little kid. My parents are hippies, so this is a very weird thing that they did, in my opinion. My dad was outside, like I don't reading on the back deck or something, and he had his shirt off, and I was a little daddy's girl. I think I was like 5, and so I started to take my shirt off too. And my mom said, "No, no, you can't do that." And I said, "Why? Dad does it. I want to go sit with Dad." And she goes, "No, girls don't do that." And I remember being so confused, like, wait, why? Does it matter that I'm a girl? And I wait, and just like that was my first moment of realizing, and I didn't know it at the time because I was only 5, but that was my first moment where I had to wonder about why is being a girl making me different in this situation. And these are things that people worry about all the time. I have been in conversations before where someone will say, "Hey, can somebody help me with this like power tools or something?" And then I'll get up to help them and say, "Oh, not you. I meant a guy." I'm like, why? Why is it intimidating for a girl to handle a power tool? Are you worried I'll hurt myself, but a guy won't hurt himself, etc.? We have these inset gender roles that we're just raised with, and it's not a bad thing if you were raised with this idea and that makes you comfortable. That's fine, but it's when your ideas start to hurt other people that it becomes problematic. Okay. Again, can we really classify 7.5 billion people into just male and female? No, we cannot. There are actually so many gender identities. There are people who do not identify as either male or female. There are people who identify as both. Okay, genderless is kind of the same thing. Genderqueer, that's going to be someone who oscillates between male and female. A lot of times this is based actually on biology. So this is the Joan versus John thing I was mentioning earlier. There is a case where somebody certain parts of the day they feel incredibly strongly masculine, and they present very masculine. They have very deep voice. They are very and they just hold themselves in a way we see as masculine. As masculine. And then suddenly, every few days or so, they switch and are very, very feminine. And they say, "Oh, I'm Joan now," and they start to act much more demure and with a very high voice, etc., etc. And there's been a study done on this person. It turns out they have this very strangely oscillating androgen versus estrogen cycle, which is very rare, and they probably have an extra chromosome that they haven't looked at yet. But when they're presenting as John, they have very high testosterone levels. But when they present as Joan, the testosterone has bottomed out and the estrogen has come up as high, and so then they start to express that. And so usually, well, yeah, we won't go into it. Usually in the brain, you're either one or the other, but only because you don't have either the estrogen or the testosterone at such levels to activate the other side. But this person has both, and our body is primed that it doesn't matter. We have all the receptors to be either male or female, and it's as far as puberty is concerned, but it's what hormone is present that activates one or the other. And so this person who has both hormones, suddenly they experience both sides, okay? So that's a form of genderqueer. And that's also, you could call that gender fluid. I'm not going to go through all of these things because some of them, I will admit to you, I don't understand fully myself, having not gone through any of them. Obviously, I identify a certain way, but keep in mind that these things are your gender identity. So this is how you identify as male, female, or other, and not sexuality. So those two things, a lot of times people get them confused in their brain, but it's actually they can be very different. So it used to freak people out so much that not everyone fit into the two main categories of gender. And so that anyone other was, before, when people didn't understand that this is very biological and normal, they used to take anyone who classified themselves as other, not man or female, very strongly, and classify them as having gender dysphoria and institutionalize them. So they would take anybody who did not, anyone who fought the system and said, "Oh, I don't know if I'm male or female and it doesn't match my genitalia. Just, you don't like that? Oh, you get to go live in an institution now." So this was a very big thing in Victorian culture. If anybody didn't fit into what was considered normal, was put into an institution. So this is These are mental institutions. This is where the lobotomy was created, and it's, if you have someone who demands that they are male when even though they present as female, well, a lobotomy will sure fix that, because what a lobotomy is you take basically an ice pick and you shove it in the nose or in the eye socket and you jiggle it around in the front part of your brain, which is where we establish what makes us really human. Our thinking, our personality, and a lot of our sexuality is based there. And yeah, you sure do get someone to quiet down about their misgendered identity if they suddenly can no longer talk. Okay, so this is seen as a justifiable way to treat people who did not clearly identify as male or female. So now we know this is incredibly not okay, and it. Oh my goodness! There's this huge fight. Everyone has this huge fight about people who are trans should have the right to use whatever bathroom they want, because and the argument against it is, well, then people will say, oh, of course I'm trans, and they're going to stalk my children into bathrooms. Well, if you have a sexual predator, they're not going to wait for a law to let them be sexual predators. They're going to be sexual predators either way. But if you're someone who doesn't feel comfortable using that doesn't feel safe going into a certain bathroom because they're going to be attacked for just trying to pee, then that's not okay either. And so that's why California especially was one of the first states that established this idea that you must have a non-gender conforming bathroom available for people who need it. Okay. Gender expression. So we talk about gender identity. Gender identity is just who you are in your head. Gender expression is how you show the world. It can be incredibly subtle. This is part of that idea of, am I going to be extra feminine today? Am I going to be non-binary today, etc.? So this could be how you dress. It could be how you act. Is it the same to be manly versus a man, or feminine versus female? You can have a feminine man. You can have a masculine female. You could be masculine one day, a female the next day. You could be masculine in one interaction and less masculine in a different interaction. So gender expression is very, very different from gender identity. This is very, very culturally derived. So again, I talked about it a little bit when I was talking about identity, and as far as like, oh, yeah, I kind of confused it a little bit. That's fine. So expression is, do you present as masculine or female, or something in between? This can be something that people get very upset about because they don't know how to react. If they're confused about how to react to you, then they can get hostile, because a lot of people, if they are confused about something, it makes them embarrassed, and then all of a sudden they become hostile because they think that can fix the situation. That is not okay. And so what really needs to come down to is, people get all up in arms about, well, what gender pronoun do you use? I'm going to still call you this. Well, that's not okay. You should the golden rule, the platinum rule, is treat everyone how they themselves want to be treated. Because how hard is it for you to just say, well, I'm going to call you him or her, versus someone who is going through this every day, every time they have to really think, how am I going to be treated by the world today when I just want to be myself, okay? But this idea of changing our gender expression, sometimes we do very much on purpose. This changes over time, okay? So, for example, literally 100 years ago in San Francisco, women were arrested and fined or jailed just for wearing pants, okay? So the idea that a woman is not allowed to wear pants, would not fly today, with Lululemon and everything. That just would not be okay. The idea of not wearing pants just because you have a vagina, ridiculous. And that extends also to the idea that, women can't vote because they have a vagina, and so their brain doesn't work as well. That's also a bunch of bullshit. And so you can't so basically, I'm going off on a rant. Gender expression does not have to be based, and how you treat someone based on that gender expression should not be determined by whether they have a penis or a vagina, or something intersex, or something else. Let's talk about how people express their gender expression. So, many people express the gender that aligns to their identity, and that's very easy for them to say. Well, it's not necessarily easy. So if you identify as female, and you're biologically female, and your gender identity is female, then that is bully for you. You get to do what you want to do to be female, right? But there are a lot of people who either they don't, their biological sex may be male, but they identify as female because, again, maybe their brain was feminized instead of masculinized, etc. There is a comfort sometimes in expressing a gender that is different from your own. So if you are worried about being raped, you might dress in a very non-feminine way. That's something that happens commonly. That does not have to say, though, that because of how you are dressed that then justifies rape. Not at all. It's just until people realize that that can't be an excuse, we have to protect ourselves. Sometimes people will dress or express themselves in an opposite gender for pleasure, such as how many people love the show RuPaul's Drag Race. So these people literally have fun and love expressing themselves as females even though they're males. And then just part of their creativity as well. So you see this in, it's not just in males dressing as females. There are drag kings. For some reason, society has not come around to drag kings as much as we have drag females or drag queens. Hopefully society will catch up. A lot of times you see this in rebellion. A lot of times teenage girls will rebel by dressing very masculine or hyper feminine, and vice versa. This could be something either to rebel against a family or against society in general. And performance. So again, using the RuPaul Drag Race as an example, a lot of times people use different gender expressions in their performances. I have a friend who is a very competent neuroscientist. She was actually one of the inspirations for the movie G.I. Jane, and she is a pole dancer on the weekends. She just enjoys the acrobatic nature of pole dancing, and unfortunately the only place that she gets to do that is in strip clubs if she wants to make money doing it. And so she will often pole dance as a male because she finds it more fun. She can do things more acrobatically and more with a lot more strength than she sees when she tries to present as female, and so she uses that in her performance. Okay, gender in summary is very, very complicated. It is not something that can just be, sometimes it can literally be aligned perfectly with your biological sex. However, it is something that we need to be very tolerant of as a society, because it is not okay for people to be scared of going to the bathroom. That is ridiculous. But it's something, because it's so complicated, we need to be very aware that it's no one's business but your own if you don't want it to be. So we don't go around checking everybody's pants. We should just trust, just because you can't tell if someone is a male or a female, if they're presenting as male or female, doesn't mean you need to go up to them and yell, hey, are you a male or a female? Because it could be that they have biological reasons that they're not presenting as quote-unquote stereotypical male or female. It could be such as something like Turner syndrome. It could be that they are going through some kind of hormonal therapy that you don't know about. It could be a tumor. So many different things. But the biggest thing is gender is not your business if somebody doesn't want it to be. Okay? So we also know that having rigid definitions of gender leads to a lot of self-harm. Some of the highest rates of suicide are in kids who do not understand their gender. Just they don't understand their gender because society says they have to do this certain thing, especially in a family that's got very rigid definitions of boys do this, girls do this, and if their brain wants them to do something else, they get so confused because society is telling them one thing, biology is telling them something different, and it leads to a lot of self-harm, especially when bullying is involved. A lot of times people are attacked for not presenting in a way that society approves, and again, confusion. Again, you don't want to be so stressed out that you are overloading your stress system day in and day out, especially over something that should be as simple as knowing who you are as a person. And I say simple with tongue-in-cheek because it's actually very, very complicated. So I'm going to wrap up today's lecture talking about sexuality. So this is how you describe and present yourself as a sexual being. It is also very complicated. It involves 3 big components: who you're attracted to. So, and this is very complicated because you could be attracted to something, to certain people, but receptive to other people, and then proceptive, so actually ready to have sex with a totally different set of people. It can be very complicated. Who you are romantically attracted to could be different from who you are intellectually attracted to, and both of those things could be different from sexual attraction. So, complicated. Let's keep going. So humans are not alone in things that like masturbation. If you've ever been to the zoo in the springtime, you know that's very true. Baboons and bonobos are 2 different ape groups that they live in a big society like humans do, and they live in a place that has lots and lots of food, so they don't have to spend their entire day searching for food. So they have time to be social, and you will often see them a lower caste male will look at an upper caste male, and the lower caste males are not allowed to have sex. Only the highest males are allowed to have sex. And you'll watch a lower caste male see a female, know they're not going to have sex, but then masturbate instead. Homosexuality is something not only found in humans. We now have several cases of penguins, a male couple or a female couple raising eggs together and going through all of the courting rituals that you see in a heterosexual penguin couple. There's an entire species of lizard that is only female. They go through different hormonal cycles and half of them will act male while the other half is acting female, and they go through these biting responses that lizards do that then let down the eggs, etc. But they have no sperm, they have no penises, and so they are literally only females. They are only homosexual. We are not the only animals that have sex for fun. So dolphins will have sex for fun. Dolphins are an incredibly frisky species, or set of species. We'll leave it at that. So there's lots of animals that will have sex for fun, not just for reproduction. However, humans are unique in egalitarian sex. So this is the idea that no matter where you are in human society, you still have the right to have sex. So remember, we talked about this being part of the Maslow's hierarchy. One of your physiological needs is to take care of your sexuality. Okay, that does not mean you get to go out and have sex with anyone you want. That means you need to find healthy ways to express your need for sexuality, for your need for just sex. That could be masturbation. So that is something you don't see in other species, such as wolves. Only certain pairs within the wolf community will have sex. Usually it's a hierarchy situation. You don't see that in humans. Okay. We also do romance. So there are species who will do courtship displays, and then the female gets to decide, are you a strong enough male based on your courtship dance? You see this in birds. That's not the same as romance. So in humans, and a lot of people argue this is a very new concept just since the 50s, where you have to go through a romantic cycle before you really realize if you're really into someone, etc. All right, so sexual orientation. Who are you attracted to? Attraction happens in the brain as a result of hormonal influences. So mammals are very, very smell-based. We don't realize it, but we are constantly judging our world based on the smells around us. And I'm not talking about just something like garbage smells, even though that's a very important smell to tell us that something bad is happening. But we smell and judge the pheromones around us all the time. So, which is to say, it's out of your control. So a lot of times who you're attracted to is completely out of your control. Okay, so if you are constantly, so anyway, this is there's been a lot of studies that look at how they take people and they have them work out for a long time, and they take the shirts off of them, nice sweaty shirts, and then have people smell them and rank them based on that stinkiness of the best smelling to the worst smelling. Really, it's just tell me which one's the worst smelling, and then the second worst smelling, and the third worst smelling. And then they flip it and say, well, if this is the least worst smelling, it's actually the best smelling. And they found that girls tend to overwhelmingly prefer males who smell like their dads. What does that mean? Don't know. Is it a safety thing? Is it just an imprinting thing? We have no idea. That's what we see. Okay? Boys can, let's say, heterosexual males can identify, they will identify females as being more sexually attractive when they're not on their periods. So when they're ovulating instead. And that is an evolutionary response to say, hey, you release more of the hormones that you're releasing, that estrogen when you're ovulating. That's a prime time to get someone pregnant. So of course it makes more sense that somebody who is ovulating is going to appear more attractive pheromonally than someone who is on their period and therefore cannot get pregnant at the moment. So out of your control. So, you could either be monosexual, so you're only attracted to one sex. So this is the one that is definitely overrepresented in culture, is heterosexuality. So you are attracted to the opposite sex. But there is homosexuality, where you're attracted to the same sex. You could be bisexual. So this is attracted to two sexes, so both males and females. A lot of times there's something called bi-erasure. You see a lot in culture where someone will say, oh, you're not actually bi, you just are confused. No, that's not true. There is biological representation that this is not actually true. Someone can be attracted to both males and females, and it's not weird. There's pansexuality, which is someone who's attracted to all sexes. So you could be cis, you could be, so that is someone who is sexual. Yeah, we won't get into that. Let's keep going. Okay, it gets even more complicated. If you are someone who is androsexual, you're attracted to males, men, and or masculinity. So you could have someone who is a homosexual female who is androphilic, so they are attracted to masculine females. Or you could have someone who's the opposite. They're gynosexual. They are attracted to female representing or feminine people. You could have someone who's pansexual and is just always attracted to someone who represents as feminine versus masculine. You could have sociosexual, so they are only attracted to people who aren't identified as cisgender, so cis being what you're born with. And that could be something where maybe you're also someone who is genderqueer or transsexual, and so you are identifying with someone who's gone through what you've also gone through. Pansexual, you're attracted to all kinds of people, regardless of biological sex, gender identity, or expression, etc. And then we have people who are asexual or non-sexual, and they are not sexually attracted, but they can still be romantically, intellectually, or spiritually attracted to somebody. So what is romantic attraction? This gets very confused with sexual attraction, even though it's often the same, okay? So this is who you'd like to fall in love with. And so this is something since we see this in people who even are asexual, this is something that's different from sex, and it's just this idea we have of love in humans is very complicated. I'm not going to get into that. I think that is something that psychology can deal with much more than me as a biologist. But again, in humans, we're the only animals that deal with this idea of romantic attraction. Even animals that mate for life do it for purely hormonal reasons and not necessarily romantic reasons. So romantic attraction is who you'd like to fall in love with. Okay? There is the counter example to romantic attraction is something like Tinder, where it's hookup culture. You're just getting out there and getting the sex and getting it done. One night stand, don't call again. That is very aromantic. There is no wooing of someone in that. It is the expectation in that is very often, I'm just here to scratch this itch and then get on my way. So keep that in mind. It's not romantic attraction. Intellectual attraction, on the other hand, is not just nerdy love. Okay, this is that deep connection you feel with someone. You could be romantically and sexually attracted to someone, but still feel like, well, they're not the one. Okay, so that is something that people like to identify as, you know it when you feel it, which doesn't explain everything, but it's this deep connection that you really work really well with somebody. So you identify and you connect on so many different levels, and it's more than just romance and it's more than just sex. It could have something to do with your sense of humor, your value system, your spirituality, things like that. And that again, we see this in people who are asexual, so it's not specifically related to sex. And so it's, again, another complicated part of the human attraction system, okay? I think I'm going to end here because starting tomorrow we'll talk about relationships. So now that we got this idea of gender being different from sexuality and biological sexuality is different from gender expression, etc., we can then go into how are all of these things, how can we, once we get all of that established, how do we have healthy relationships and develop good intimate communication? Bye!